I'm Michael Takiff. The following is adapted from Black Tie, a son's journey through the death and life of his father, a one-man show written and performed by me, directed by Brian Lane Green. My father, Al Takiff, spent the years of the Great Depression getting an education, commuting to NYU during the evenings while working the day shift at a chemical plant. Despite his long employment after the war at the Manhattan headquarters of a large oil company, the Great Depression lived within Dad, ineradicable, like a virus lodged permanently in his spinal cord. It's been over 20 years since he died. Time, it is said, heals all wounds. True, but it leaves scars. Dad was 79. He died in Elizabeth, New Jersey, the working-class town where he'd lived his entire life. The Elizabeth General Hospital, where Dad spent the last 4 weeks of his life, was not a facility you went to if you had other options. That is, if you had other options and were not Al Takiff. You went to bigger, better hospitals in more affluent New Jersey towns like Summit or Morristown. You avoided this old standby in this old, not-so-affluent town. Once or twice, Dad did go to the hospital in Summit, but he was never comfortable there. That virus in his spinal cord acted up when he stayed at the fancy hospital. Elizabeth was good enough for Al Takiff. Al Takiff tried hard not to be too good for Elizabeth. As they do in hospitals everywhere, before meals, the staff would distribute a multiple-choice menu. Patients would check off which entree they wanted, which dessert, which beverage. Each day, Dad would check the box for low-sodium V8 juice. Low sodium because his ankles were swollen and salt worsened the condition. Each day, the cafeteria staff would bring him a single-serving can of regular V8 juice, which contains as much salt as the entire Dead Sea. Each day the can would be taken away with the dirty dishes and tossed into the trash undrunk. A few days after Dad entered the hospital, my mother flew to Florida to visit the modest retirement condominium she and my father had purchased some years earlier. My selfless mother went down not for a vacation, but to see that the apartment was in acceptable condition for planned visits by my sister and me. She had bought her ticket several weeks before Dad had gone into the hospital. What made it possible for her to go ahead and take the trip was my availability to come stay in Elizabeth and assume primary hospital visiting responsibility for the 4 days, Wednesday through Saturday, she was to be gone. I've always been the one in my family without the real job. On Thursday or Friday evening, I was at our home in Elizabeth, getting ready to drive downtown to the hospital, when a light bulb went off in my head. I can stop at the Pathmark supermarket, which is right along the way, and pick up a 6-pack of single-serving cans of, wait for it, low-sodium V8. Presto, problem solved. Even though I'm the one son of 3 who didn't go to medical school, the one whose self-sabotaging life choices have rendered me incapable of knowledgeably contributing to the maintenance of my father's health. I can do my part. Pathmark had what I was looking for. I paid the cashier, got back in the car, and drove downtown on my mission. I parked, went up to Dad's room, and with pride presented my offering. Take it home. What? I don't want it. Why? Take it home. They always give you the wrong juice. This solves the problem. I don't want it. Why? Take it home. After 10 minutes of arguing, I finally got him when I said, you can't refuse a gift. Now, that was hitting him with 2 arrows in a single shot. Etiquette, he'd raised us to value good manners, and guilt, always an effective motivator. All right, he said at last, I guess you can leave it. Thank you for bringing it. On Saturday night, my mother returned to Elizabeth. I returned to my home in New York. A few days later, I came back to Elizabeth to visit Dad, and afterward went home with my mother for dinner. And there, on the top shelf of the pantry, was the 6-pack of single-serving cans of, wait for it, low-sodium V8, each can unopened, still in its little plastic ring. He'd sent it home with my mother. What was going on? Why did Dad prefer to do without his beverage when all he had to do was accept my gift and enjoy it? I mean, really, He could have had a stinking V8. I think he couldn't abide any suggestion that he was somehow special in this hospital filled with patients less affluent and less educated than he. Moreover, he'd never pointed out to any of the hospital staff that he kept getting a drink that not only was not what he'd ordered, but was deleterious to his health, in a place the whole purpose of which was the improvement of health. The presence at his bedside of the right drink would amount to an unspoken but visible criticism of the food worker's job performance, indeed, of the job performance of everyone at this substandard hospital, beginning with the clueless doctors who somehow didn't see to it that Dad received a low-sodium menu to begin with. Even though Dad had ascended to the middle class in early adulthood, he'd never left the old hardscrabble life completely behind. When Dad would get ready to leave the house during cooler months, on weekends when he wasn't in a hurry, he'd go to the coat closet, take out his overcoat, put it on, button it, then take his hat, a fedora of some kind, off the shelf, close the closet door, and turn toward the big mirror over the fireplace. And as he placed the hat on his head, his eyes would narrow, his stare would grow distant, worldly, a little tough. All of a sudden, our plodding, unadventurous middle-class father was once more the son of the lower to working-class neighborhood where he'd come of age during the 20s and 30s, where guys were nicknamed Shorty and Duke, Lefty and Slim, where you never left the house without a tie, where you hung out at the pool hall smoking your Luckies. And then, just as quickly, the look in Dad's eyes would be gone, and our plodding, unadventurous middle-class father would be on his way, taking me to visit my grandmother in the big greenhouse on Marshall Street. Let's go, Mr. Michael. Going to the local discount store to buy a flashlight. The guy putting on his hat was an Elizabeth guy. Not a guy with 3 degrees from NYU, not a guy with an air-conditioned office in Lower Manhattan, a guy from the neighborhood. The neighborhood had rules. Rule number 1, you weren't better than anyone else. You didn't get special treatment. You didn't expect special treatment. Special treatment was for those other folks, the ones on the other side of the track. At Pete's Pool Hall, if you ordered a beer, you didn't get a microbrew from Idaho. You got, guess what? A beer. If you went to Lou's Luncheonette and you got a glass of tomato juice to start your meal, you didn't ask if it had too much salt. You were darn glad to have the juice and the 3 cents to pay for it. And if it wasn't perfectly chilled, you didn't give the waiter a hard time about it. Sure, maybe at the fancy hospital in the fancy town, patients always got the juice they ordered, and if they didn't, maybe they'd complain about it. But this wasn't the fancy hospital. This wasn't the fancy town. The last thing Dad wanted was for someone to say, "Hey, get a load of the old guy with a private stash of juice. I guess he thinks he's better than us." Dad didn't want people to get the wrong impression, because the truth was, he didn't think he was better than them. Dad was an Elizabeth guy. This was the Elizabeth General Hospital, and that was just fine by him.